before you do anything, you have to have a vision for your life. After you've defined that vision, you have to make sure that every act you do is intentional on achieving that vision. And then he has a third part of the framework that I think is extremely valuable that a lot of people miss, and that is to make sure that you have a set of values. When you're making all those acts with intent towards your vision, you have to make sure that you can fall back on a set of values.
Ladies and gentlemen, today was one of those episodes that sets your soul on fire. It's one of those episodes where, as a host, I walk away feeling so aligned with my vision, purpose, mission, calling, all the things, because we had a very special guest on the show today that had me fired up. Welcome back to another episode of the Seeds of Success podcast. It's your host, Colin Walters, and today we had Jake Hadden on the show, who is a serial entrepreneur. He has built and successfully exited a company selling for $20 million. He is now running a new company called Engineer Up that does like IT consulting services. He is also not only an entrepreneur and super savvy businessman and hustler and grinder, but he's a family man, and he prioritizes living a well-balanced lifestyle that revolves around being a husband, being a father, being a phenomenal friend and brother. He prioritizes his health and fitness. We talk about endurance events. We talk about how to prioritize schedules and how to maximize your time on this earth, right? We talk about some of the philosophies that he lives by, including prioritizing life experiences and how we only live once. So go do those things that set your soul on fire, right? We'll dive into some of what those hobbies are and also some lessons that he's learned from failures along the way. So if you have any interest at all in entrepreneurship, in business, starting and building your own company, in how to lead and live a well-balanced lifestyle, and how to prioritize and plan your time, your days, your weeks, your life, this is the episode for you. Stay tuned, listen in. There's a ton to learn and be inspired by. So here we go with the live interview. All right, here we go. Jake Hadden, welcome to the Seeds of Success podcast. It's very nice to have you on the show.
I'm glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
You bet. And first off, I think that something that is super cool is made a little promotional LinkedIn post yesterday, and that thing got blown up. You have a lot of fans and you have a lot of people supporting you. I know this is catching you a little off guard there, but what does that mean to you? Was that kind of the first thing I wanted to ask?
It actually meant a lot. So there were two people that commented on that
It's
particular
cool.
post that meant a lot. And there were two of our customers at Digital Crafts, which was my first company.
Mm-hmm.
And so Michael Irby commented saying he remembered a conversation he had on the phone with me 8 years ago.
That's
And
crazy.
that meant a lot to me
Mm-hmm.
because Digital Crafts was a for-profit school.
Mm.
And I was always worried that, for-profit education can be kind of like seen in a negative light. So anytime I talked to a customer, I was very, very sure to be like, hey, you don't have to come to this school. Like, I'm just telling you what it's like, what it costs. It's your choice. And so I'm really glad to hear that that's the kind of reaction he had, because
It's cool.
I was really nervous about that when I talked to customers. And then kind of the same thing with Rishi's comment. He mentioned that. And so I still keep in touch with both of them today. So that was really cool to see.
Very, very, very cool. And so for those listening, you hear Jake just mentioned digital crafts. I'll let him dive into that, but that was a entrepreneurial journey and venture that he got into. But Jake, it's very nice to have you on the show. You obviously have a lot of fans, a lot of backing, a lot of people that you've impacted and influenced over the years. And so maybe if you just want to introduce yourself to the audience, who you are, a little bit about yourself, and we can kind of just go from there.
Absolutely. And before I do, I just want to say thank you to you
Sure.
having me on. And then I think you've inspired me to, and we'll talk probably a little bit more about Dan Martell later in
Yeah.
the podcast. But
Happy to.
I did mention or see on social media that he has this founders hike every Tuesday. And I've thought in the back of my head, I was like, I should go out there and meet the people that do that and maybe meet him. And I saw you did that. And then maybe even drove your car quite a distance to get there.
Yeah.
And if you can do that, then I sure can hop on a plane and get there. So Thanks for the inspiration. I'll have to send you a picture when I'm on top of the mountain.
You bet. That's yeah, Knox Mountain, man. Yeah, I drove my 7 hours up to Kelowna, Canada, which is, I mean,
Yeah.
gorgeous in itself for anybody who wants to go visit a beautiful place in the world. And then met some really cool people, two people and specifically that were not Dan that I walked away there with as friends. One came on the podcast, talked about her entrepreneurship journey.
Mhm.
So you meet some very interesting and special people there that are very like-minded and can help elevate the way that you think. And then of course met Dan, did the podcast. So yeah, man.
Very cool.
I'll look forward to that picture.
Well, look, as a quick intro, I'm from a smaller town in the state of Georgia, LaGrange, Georgia. Really proud of my roots there. I come from a really good family, loving parents, and went to the University of Georgia. And Georgia, on the very first day of school, I met a guy named Max McChesney, and he was my business partner for digital
Mm,
crafts.
mm,
And I had a few jobs after college, but fast forward to when I started digital crafts was really when I started my entrepreneurial journey, which is what I like to talk about and share with individuals. But I was walking around, the food hall at the University of Georgia with my tray of food in my hand and sat at a random table, and Max just happened to be at that table, and we've been, best friends ever since.
it's crazy.
So that's kind of a cool little story. We
That's
didn't
so
launch
cool.
digital, we launched digital crafts probably, I would say 4 to 5 years after college. So we were friends in college and then friends after, and then we did that. But in 2015, I launched Digital Crafts, which was a coding boot camp. So long story short, if you wanted to change your career and become a software engineer, you could quit your job, come to our school, learn how to code, and then hopefully land an entry-level job in
Mhm.
software upon graduation. So we grew that for about 6.5 years. We had campuses in Atlanta, Georgia, Houston, Texas, Tampa, Florida, and some other like kind of micro campuses. Really were partnerships with the universities, and we ended up selling that company in 2021. It was a huge success for me and Max and everyone on our team. And I learned a lot through that journey. We impacted a lot of students very positively. Not every student succeeded, which was tough to see, but for the most part, the vast majority did.
Mhm.
And then after digital crafts, I've recently started a new company. It's called Engineer Up, and we're focused on IT consulting services. So think of like a Fortune 500 company that's looking to strategically invest in their digital products. We'll come in, we'll build those products for them, and then hopefully continue to maintain them after. So maybe they're building an app for a customer, ordering food on it, and then want somebody like a team of engineers to really manage that for the next few years.
Got it.
And that's where our services come into play.
Got it.
In addition to that, probably the most important part of me is I am married. My wife, Erin, couldn't do any of this without her. So we've been together for 16 years, married for 8.
Wow.
We've just been married longer than we've dated, recently, which is kind
Mm,
of.
that's cool.
And then we have 2 young kids, Eleanor, who's 4 years old, and Henry, who's 2.
Mm.
So,
So and thank you for sharing the background.
yeah,
Sounds like you have built an amazing life and very well-rounded, well-balanced, as you would say, that you're proud of. And kind of curious around digital crafts, if we don't mind going back to that, right? Because
sure.
if I remember correctly from our conversation yesterday, you studied finance, I thought, in
That's right.
college, finance and business. So how did you spin up a coding boot camp, for lack of a better way to put it? And
Yeah.
how did that come to fruition?
I think every story is longer. It's a longer story than just a simple answer.
For sure.
So I studied finance in college really because most of my friends did,
Mm,
but also my father studied finance, and
okay.
I knew it was a kind of a conservative way to go through college and get a job.
Mm,
But I hate finance, and I am
mm,
not good at finance. I'm okay at it now because I've have experience managing books of a small business like Digital Crafts or Engineer
fair.
Up. So I understand accounting a little bit, understand finance a little bit now. I did well in school, but it was never a passion of mine. It was almost like I was kind of forced into it because my friends did it. I knew it would be a kind of a conservative way to have a good career. But I will say I had the hardest time getting a job out of college. So I graduated University of Georgia in 2010, had a 3.5 GPA, so not terrible, not I wouldn't say wonderful, but I had an extremely tough time getting a job, and I think that's a blessing in disguise. I did not get a job in finance. My first job out of college was selling fertilizer. So I worked for a company based out of Colorado, and I would drive around in Atlanta. I would drive around and meet landscaping companies and try to sell them fertilizer and pesticide and insecticide.
Okay.
Fortunately, I got a job at Accenture doing management consulting shortly after that, which was
Okay.
really a good brand stamp to have on your resume.
Mm-hmm.
But all throughout that, my dad and mom have been huge proponents of entrepreneurship. So in
Mm-hmm.
college, I started a business with my girlfriend, now wife,
Okay.
where we launched a company. It was successful, and my dad helped, give me some startup capital for that. I think he gave me $5,000. And then when it came to digital crafts, I wasn't necessarily passionate about software engineering or education, but I was simply passionate about becoming an entrepreneur.
Mm-hmm.
And all the cards lined up for me. My wife had a phenomenal job, so I was able to quit my job and we didn't have to change our lifestyle.
Mm-hmm.
Something that most people wouldn't be able to do.
Right.
So she had a phenomenal job that helped us. And then my business partner, I would say, has a really good network in Atlanta. And so if we needed to raise capital, it wouldn't have been an issue.
Mm-hmm.
So if you put those two things together,
Mm-hmm.
the decision for me to quit my job and take the leap into entrepreneurship,
Mm-hmm.
that made it easy for me in that time of my life.
Yeah. And I think that's where I was going to be curious about, right? Is like you have the, you go into finance because you think it's what you should do. Seems safe,
Mhm.
seems conservative. Your friends are doing it. Your father did it.
Right.
So of course that is the logical step. But what I'm inspired by is you did that, but didn't feel married to it, right? Because I
Yeah.
feel like we have so many people that we'll run into that did this, studied this specific topic in college, and then therefore they feel like they have to follow through with that. I
Right.
was similar way. I studied sport management and Spanish, and here I am in software sales. So, so it's basically how it goes when you get into sales. Doesn't surprise me that you studied finance, didn't have a passion for it, and ended up in sales one way or another.
Yeah.
Um, Okay, but that makes sense because you also had the support side of things to take a calculated risk, right? For
Right.
your personal entrepreneurship venture. And then it was you and Max, I believe, who then partnered up and did the
Yep.
digital crafts thing. Okay,
Yeah.
cool.
So we launched Digital Crafts in 2015. It was
Yep.
completely bootstrapped. We didn't take pay for 2 years,
Wow.
and we did the thing. It was a lot of
Wow.
hard work. Building a team, building a
Mm-hmm.
brand,
Mm-hmm.
building reputation, building the business infrastructure, and we just really didn't look up for 6 years. Just kept our head down and tried to do the right thing and continue to build this business.
What does not looking up look like in those years? Is that like you all specifically in a room together, like
Yeah.
whiteboards and brainstorming and notepads and heads on keyboards? Like what does that work actually look like?
I have a lot of good memories of me and Max and other people on our team
Hmm.
in a room doing just that, like
Yeah.
writing things as fast as we can on message boards online, just getting our name out
Okay.
over and over every single day. And it starts to compound and people start to hear about us and you tell the story over and over and over. But I think one of like the underlying point of your question might just be the grind.
Mm-hmm.
Like, yeah, I didn't really understand what the grind meant until a few years into digital crafts, or even really looking back on it now. Like you read about the grind, you're going to start a company, you read books like, oh, it's a grind.
Mm-hmm.
But you really don't know that. You're like, of course I'm going to work hard. But it's not. The grind to me was repeating what digital crafts is 100 times every day.
Mm-hmm.
Like every person you meet, what do you do? Oh, here's what I do. Potential customer, oh, here's what I do. And it's repeating the same thing over and over and over, typing the same thing online and posting it over and over and over and over.
Mm-hmm.
And it adds value, but it's extremely repetitive and administrative, but you have to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that was a lot of the grind for me.
Mm-hmm. And I remember listening to another podcast that you were in on that 0 to 5,000, and you talk about how, you'll hear people say that, for lack of a better way to put it, hard work is overrated in a sense, or like, working smarter and not having to work as hard can
Yeah.
get it done. But it seemed like you had a different opinion on that just from your experience, or how would you frame up how
Yeah.
you think about hard work and strategic work and, kind of your experience with that?
So at Digital Crafts, it very much was work hard for
Yeah.
me.
Uh-huh.
But at the same time, you're like working hard in a smart way,
Hmm.
working hard in a smart way.
For sure.
And so, yeah, I think it would be really tough for me to argue that you cannot work hard in your first startup.
Hmm.
Like, I think now with Engineer Up, I have a little bit more flexibility because I have a cushion that I can rely on. It wouldn't be the end of the world if Engineer Up didn't succeed for
Hmm.
me.
Hmm.
And so it allows me to take a smarter approach to my work, which I know we're
Right.
going to talk about.
Right.
But when you're doing it for the first time and you don't have a cushion to fall back on, I think you have to work extremely hard, but in a smart way.
Hmm. So it's like what you in, to recap a little bit, in that first venture, it's like that is all that you have at that point in time. So it has to work. Therefore, you are committed to doing what has to get done day
Yep.
after day after day, right? And now transitioning to engineer up, it sounds like you've taken a lot of lessons, you're applying them, you are, adjusting strategy to work smarter in some different ways. At the
Yep.
beginning of this call, we talked about Dan Martell, which is
Mhm.
how you and I really got actually connected here once you found out about, the podcast that I did with Dan
Yep.
Martell. And so maybe talk to me a little bit about what are you deploying now at Engineer Up that you didn't deploy in the past, or
Yep.
how are you working smarter, right? Along with kind of the strategic work behind that.
Yeah, it's a great question, Colin. I think one thing I want to point out is that had I read Dan's book during the digital crafts days, I would have
Mm,
approached problems differently.
mm,
Like I maybe wouldn't have done as many administrative tasks.
right.
I probably would have invested more in the company, which might have allowed us to scale more within the time frame.
Mm,
So I'm not saying you don't work smart. Like obviously you work smart and you take everything you've learned and you apply it. And we probably didn't do enough of that at Digital Crafts. We just probably relied on hard work more
mm,
so than
mm,
I guess advice from seasoned entrepreneurs.
mm,
Now in Engineer Up, I'm in a different place in my life. So we ended up selling Digital Crafts and it was a success. So I have a financial cushion. I also have a family.
mm,
And it's extremely important for me to design my life in a way where my business does not take over my life.
mm,
And the way I kind of approach it now is I have 9 to 5 to do business, but also personal goals and some family goals as well. But outside of 9 to 5, it's all family for me, except for this podcast. Yeah,
mm,
it's a little late on the East Coast for me today, but that's fine. I design my day around it, so it works.
mm,
And so I'm very regimented today about 9 to 5, and I'll just walk you through my day today. Like my son Henry woke up at 5 a.m., which is great. It's a little early,
mm.
so I was flustered, but I got him at 5, and I played with him until 8, and then my nanny got there at 8. And after you play with your son, a 2-year-old son, from 5 to 8, you are or can be mentally exhausting, right? I enjoyed the time with him. Obviously, I love him a lot,
For sure.
but I was mentally exhausted.
I get it.
And normally I would go into the office at 8 or 8:15.
Mm,
But today I was like, you know what? I'm not ready to go in. So I drove to the park and went on a 2-mile run.
mm,
I felt wonderful after my 2-mile run. I called my
mm.
trainer. He had an opening. I went to the gym and worked out with him. And then
Beautiful.
I was like, you know what? I don't really want to go in the office yet either. I'm going to go home, eat lunch. I had lunch with my son. And then I went into the office later.
Hmm.
And I think it's extremely important, when I design my day and how I work and the responsibilities that fall on my shoulders, I have the flexibility to do those things.
Hmm.
And that's just the chapter that I'm in my life today. Could I have done that with digital crafts? Probably not. Also had a 50-50 business partner.
Hmm.
So you don't want to let him or her down when you have a partner. In this new company, I'm 100% owner. So I have a little bit more control and flexibility there. It comes with pros and cons, but
Well, and I think, to your point there, and props to you for giving yourself what you need in those moments, right? Because,
Mhm.
I feel like when you get into, your work mode at noon after having, done those things for your health and mental state, right? you're going to go and be that much more productive from 12 to, it's like past 7 p.m. now. It's going to be a much more productive time for you because it was a transition that
Mhm.
worked a lot better than going from, playtime, feeling mentally exhausted, and then trying to go and, kind
Right.
of grind through things mentally. But it sounds like you gave yourself what you needed in those moments, which can be a, kind of a battle to choose between at times. It looks like you might say something if you wanted to add anything.
Yeah. So, I mean, just going back to your original question of how I'm designing
Yeah.
engineer up the business in my day,
Hmm.
I've thought about this overnight after we talked yesterday, and I've actually applied this framework. It's from a guy. His name's Warren Rustin,
Okay.
and you wouldn't know him. I heard him speak at an entrepreneurs organization event, an EO event, like let's say in 2018, and it changed my life. I've been journaling every day since then because he mentioned that.
Okay.
But a few years ago, maybe two, he came out with a book, and it's called The Leader Within Us.
Mm.
And he has a simple framework on how you should design your life. And I've put this to practice for the last few years, and it's really paid off. And so I'm taking that framework, which I'll walk through in a second, and I'm coupling that with Dan Martell's approach to business,
Okay.
and kind of mashing them together. And that's how I'm designing Engineer Up.
Okay.
And what that looks at like is Warren preaches about this framework where you have to have a vision for your life. He calls it a clarity of vision.
Hmm.
And this sounds so cliche, but when I read the book and when I heard Warren talk, it's what I was seeking. So it like resonated with me deeply. But before you do anything, you have to have a vision for your life. After you've defined that vision, you have to make sure that every act you do is intentional on achieving that vision. And then he has a third part of the framework that I think is extremely valuable that a lot of people miss, and that is to make sure that you have a set of values. When you're making all those acts with intent towards your vision, you have to make sure that you can fall back on a set of values,
Mm.
right? When you interact with someone new or you're trying to sell your product to someone, you don't want to do it in a slimy, sleazy way. You have to have a set of values to fall back on.
Hmm.
So then after you achieve this vision, you can look back and be proud of it.
Mm.
So that's the framework I use to design my life. Um, and then if you take Dan Martell's approach to business, where you're offloading tasks, to make sure that you as a leader can stay open-minded and do the most important strategic things. I'm doing that at Engineer Up. My first hire was an executive assistant, and Nina is incredible.
Hmm.
She's my executive assistant. Then I hired a recruiter because recruiting was taking all my time, bringing in new talent.
Mm.
Then I hired a business development executive. So I'm very much like really trying to analyze what am I doing on a daily basis that sucks all my time up,
Mm.
that and also might be like an energy suck for me personally, and offloading those tasks to people that love to do it.
Hmm.
Right. The business development executive I just hired loves the cold call.
Hmm.
I'm tired of that. I've been doing it for a year and a half now, and it's my turn to put that on someone else. But he loves it, right? And that's his expertise.
Mm.
So that's kind of the approach I'm taking for Engineer Up. It's kind of like a lifestyle versus Dan Martell's approach to business and putting it together.
Hmm. And just to recap for those listening that maybe may not be familiar with Dan Martell's work, it's basically a buy back your time
Right.
principle. Whereas you identify the things for you as an individual that light you up, right? Give you energy
Yep.
and that drive the business forward, most effectively and make you, in his words, make you money. Right. So how can
Right.
you free up your time, Jake, to do those things more, the things that you enjoy and the things that actually drive revenue
Absolutely.
for the business, right? And move the needle. So because then to your point, basically being able to outsource things and starting, for entrepreneurs on the show, like starting with that executive assistant who that's who I coordinated with in order to actually schedule this interview was
That's
Nina,
right.
right? And
Oh
she
yeah.
was amazing to work with.
Yeah.
So, like, and then you and I connected yesterday, right, for the first time.
Um,
So she did all the back end, like, the nitty gritty, get things coordinated, schedules, emails, aligning things. So then you can
Right.
focus on, the things that are important to you in your well balanced life, like time with Henry in the
Yep.
morning, right? Like your physical health, right? And this well balanced lifestyle. And it sounds like, if I'm understanding you correctly, this Warren Rustin had a pretty big impact on
Huge.
kind of just like designing how you actually want to go and pursue life, right? Starting with that clear
Yeah.
vision. Like, was there so like when you, and I'm very curious about this. So when you saw Warren speak live, you saw him speak live, correct? That's what you said.
On live and yeah.
Okay. So what did you do on this whole vision aspect? Like, did you have a rough idea going into that, what you kind of wanted
Yeah,
your vision?
so
Like, talk to me about that.
I had some takeaways from Warren's talk back in 2018, 2019.
Mm,
And that takeaway was more about how to start my day every day. And he preaches this process called the 1-10-10-10.
cool. I wanted to ask
And I've
about
been
that.
doing that for a number of years now. And
Is that
it
where your
is
journaling's tied into that you mentioned?
right.
Okay.
Yeah. So just really quickly, one is the first second you wake up, you throw your feet on the side of the bed and you ask yourself, why are you on this earth? And
Whoa.
it's really cool to do that for a month because it changes. It might be your wife's birthday or something might have happened. You're like, I'm on this earth today to support her.
Mm,
Or it might be, I am on this earth today to play catch with my kids. Or it might be business related, but it changes. It's really cool to see that over time. So 1 second to say, why are you on this earth? 10-10-10. So 10 minutes of thinking about what you're grateful for. 10 minutes of reading. Warren says reading something that it makes you feel grateful. One thing that I was reading recently is like the most famous speeches of all time.
mm,
So it's not necessarily like gratefulness reading, but it's just something kind of motivating.
totally.
And then the third 10 is journaling for 10 minutes. And journaling 10 minutes for things you're grateful for. I've kind of twisted that to like I just journal for whatever I want to journal about.
Hmm.
A lot of times it's business. Other times it's like, hey, I'm traveling with my family, and that's nice.
Mm,
So that's the one thing I took away from his speech. And then when he published his book, I read it, and I've probably read it 6 or 7 times now. But if the framework for how
wow.
do you
Okay.
decide the vision or determine the vision for your life, it's really spelled out well in the book. So I was able to follow it, and it probably took me, I say a few days, but it was probably like 2 or 3 weeks to really perfect my vision.
Hmm.
And then, and that changes. I review it every so often and I'll tweak it. But then I take that vision and I set goals that align to it. And if we're going to talk about this a little more later, but for example, part of my vision is the fourth tier is like YOLO. You only live once.
Okay.
And I tie that to like more like physical activities,
Yeah.
right? You only live once, really challenge yourself. And so I've done the half Ironman and I've done the marathon, which we can talk about more. But those are goals that I set that align with my vision.
Right.
And and then I also have a routine that really captures like the intent, right? To make sure everything I do every day is really intentional to achieving those goals and therefore reaching that vision.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
I'm not perfect. I'm not perfect, right? But I would say 70% of the time I'm tracking. And if you look back in the last few years, like I can look back and say proudly that, yeah, I've come a long way and I've made
Hmm.
a lot of steps in the right direction. And I wouldn't have been able to do that had I not applied this framework.
Hmm. So I'm kind of a nerd when it comes to this stuff and I get like super into it. So when you're, for those listening on this whole vision aspect, right?
Right.
And a lot of, people will have a partner, like you have a partner. Are you
Right.
sitting down and like crafting that vision with your partner, or do you have an idea for your personal life and then you try to intertwine it with your partner?
Yeah.
Like how did you navigate that?
So Aaron and I are extremely close, been together for a long time, and
Hmm.
we're pretty aligned on, everything without even us saying it out loud. It's really
Yeah,
cool.
that's amazing.
When it comes to this stuff, it's more me,
Yeah.
and then I review it with her.
Okay. Yeah.
And I do think at some point we'll want to maybe hopefully take it to the next step where we do it together. But now it's more of like, hey, Aaron, this is my vision for our
Hmm.
family.
Hmm.
Can we talk through that? And like, where does it not align with you?
Hmm.
Are
Hmm.
you okay with me taking on this goal this
Hmm.
year?
Hmm.
Because if I do a half Ironman, it's going to take a lot of my time.
Hmm.
So it's more about reviewing it with her to see if she's aligned at a high level and then just making sure that any kind of commitment I make is not taking time away from our marriage
For
or,
sure.
me being a father.
Yeah. Well,
So
and I know that, and thank you for sharing that. I know that's, private information, like
yeah,
personal information. I know that, like Dan Martell and his wife Renee, like they sit down basically in December and will like map out, the upcoming year together, but
Right.
taking both of their visions and then coinciding them and integrating them together. I have another friend who is like big Ironman athlete, right? And so when it's like heavy training season, him and his wife sit down, calendars out, and they map
Yeah.
out, okay, who's going to take care of the kids this day? Cause she does her own training, right? So it's like, who's got the morning shift? Who's got the evening shift? Who's going to
Mhm.
be able to get their second workout in on lunch, and who's going to, so it's like just this, navigation of communication and planning and logistics and, integrating visions with goals. And so I think
Yeah.
that's super healthy the way that you're going about it.
I mean,
Yeah.
every couple or individual is going to have their own approach to it, right? And
Right.
the first year I did it, it didn't work for me, but I've continued to tweak it
Mm.
where it works for me and my family.
Hmm.
And, I'll continue to do that as, as we get older, if the kids get older. And
Yeah.
so it's very much a process that evolves.
Right. And I would imagine it's like the same thing with your vision. You have like your general vision, I would say, but I would imagine it kind of tweaks and adjusts depending on curveballs that life throws your way and things
It
you
does. Well,
don't plan for. So,
to be very honest, the vision stays pretty much the same.
okay.
And Warren will say you need to create a vision that you can repeat, like a one sentence thing.
Hmm.
That's not what I did.
Hmm.
Right. I have a line for my family. I think for my personal life, like my personal goals, my friendships, and entrepreneurship. I
Okay.
think that's kind of how it
It's
goes.
like bucketed out.
It's bucketed out,
Yeah.
and then I set goals for each bucket.
Mm-hmm.
So the goals change,
Mm-hmm.
right? So, if I set a goal where I want to fly fish every month
Yeah,
because that helps me, be at peace.
for sure.
But also, I just want to become a better fly fisherman. Like I want to become better, and so you got to keep doing it. It's really hard to pick fly fishing back up if you hadn't done it for a long time.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
and so, but I'll have a month where I don't go, and I can either change the goal or continue down the path,
Mm.
right? So sometimes I'll change the goal because, like, hey, this just isn't going to work with the responsibilities I have as a father, or
Mm-hmm.
whatever it may be.
Mm-hmm.
Or it's like, you know what, I had a bad month, but I'm back on it, and I'm
Mm-hmm.
going to finish this next
Mm-hmm.
one. So I adjust my goals, but for the most part, the vision that has stayed the same.
I'm smiling big because in your podcast that I listened to yesterday on that 0 to 5,000, you mentioned the fly fishing, and I'm going down to Louisiana here in a couple of weeks to visit
Okay,
my sister. And
redfish.
you literally caught me. I was Googling where I can go fly fish today on online, so I was like trying to look up where I can go. So that's
If you're going
hilarious.
down to the coast, it's like the best in the world for redfish. So
Okay, cool. Well, I will add that to my next.
literally the best in the world.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, we'll may have to take that offline because
I've never been down there, but it's on my bucket list for sure.
well, if that's on your bucket list, sounds like it should be on mine too. And you have a we'll get into this later, but you have a pretty cool bucket list is what it sounded like. So got to, we'll touch on that here in a little bit, but I think where this vision is kind of stemming and transitioning into is, you have your different buckets, right? Relationships, family
Yep.
life, entrepreneurship and business and health goals, fitness, right? And so, one thing that you are a big advocate for and have transitioned into, in life. And it's even from, you've been sports back in the day and everything, but like this well balanced lifestyle, right?
Mhm.
And making sure to prioritize the family time, your personal time, your health and wellness, right? Your hobbies, fly fishing, goals,
Yep.
right? Um, so how do you go about like thinking about your weeks and your months, or are there like non-negotiables that you set up, or do you just take it, is it more of like a, fluid approach? Like, how do you think about well-balanced lifestyle? Or like, what would you like the audience to know about how you think about it now compared
Yeah, so
to like where you were?
mine is not a fluid approach. Like I don't just let things happen. I very
Mm-hmm.
much plan things. So
Mm-hmm.
which this is a big difference between my wife and I. She's more fluid. Like if the day's open, we'll go do something fun. Is the way she would approach it. And I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
if the day's open, we need to plan something like 2 days before, so I know that we're going to go do this for fun.
Right.
But that's just my style, and so
Mm-hmm.
I do plan everything out. And I've even gotten better about this recently. And so, but it all goes back to my goals. So if my goal is to fly fish every month, I book that on my calendar,
Mhm.
and I take off work to do it. I do like,
Mhm.
I'll block the whole Tuesday or Thursday because those are days I don't work out at the gym,
Okay.
and I'll go fly fishing. And so I have found personally for me that I'm able to achieve more goals, whether it's family related, health related, professional, or personal, if I plan for it,
Mhm.
right? I know that I'm going to spend more time with my daughter Eleanor and teaching her how to ride a bike if it's planned.
Mm.
If it's not planned for me, I may forget about it, and instead of
Mhm.
taking her outside to ride the bike, I'll, just hang out with her and, in the kitchen.
Mhm.
So,
Mhm.
and neither one's wrong, but my goal is to teach her how to ride the bike.
Right.
So if it's planned, then I tackle it. So I'm very much of a planner.
Yeah, well, I hear intentionality. You are very intentional with
Uh, yeah.
what you're going to do with your time
And I'm
is
not perfect. And
Mhm.
I think it's okay for everybody to know that. Like, it's okay not to be perfect. But if for 70, 80% of the time you follow through,
Mhm.
just imagine how much better you're going to be after 5
Right.
years.
Right. And so, taking your intentionality with time and planning into consideration. Yesterday, you and I talked about big challenges, right?
Hmm.
Specifically, the half Ironman that I believe it was your brother challenged you to
Right.
do. And so, there's obviously you can't just show up at the start line and give it a go for an Ironman. You got to do a lot of training that comes with
Yeah.
a lot of planning out your day, especially when you have a family, a wife, you're a father, you run a business, right? You got all these things going on. You want to hit your fly fishing goals, right? So,
Right.
um, what was that challenge, and kind of walk
Yeah.
us through that process of the half Ironman, and then where it led you.
Yeah.
Um,
So the half Ironman, as you mentioned, is something my older brother challenged me to do. And it was
okay,
like the best thing that ever happened to me.
yeah. Why do you
And
think he challenged you to do it in that time?
say again.
Why do you think he challenged you to do that half Ironman at that time?
Well, my brother and I are extremely close.
Okay.
And a little bit of backstory. He lived in Singapore for like 8 years,
Hmm.
so a long way away from the
Hmm.
U.S.
Yeah, very
And
much
he
so.
moved back to Denver, and Atlanta's still pretty far from Denver,
Mhm.
but we've been pretty close, and we've just maintained a really, really strong relationship. And I think he was just like, you know what, if I want to double down on that, he's very passionate or was about these long endurance challenges. And
Right.
he's like, you know what, I'm going to bring Jake along with me so we can kind of do it together and just
I
have
love
that
it.
friendship,
Cool.
brothership.
Very cool.
So that's why he didn't have to challenge me. He didn't need my help to challenge, like push him. He's very driven,
Hmm.
but I'm really glad he did it. And the story that I shared with you that I do want to share with your audience that was life changing for me is, the reason that half Ironman was life changing for me is that really throughout my life, a lot of things have come easily.
Hmm.
And, good grades in school, make friends easily, girlfriends, just everything. I did well in sports. So everything for me, I had a really good family. It's not to say that there weren't challenges along the way, right? And people didn't help me, luck wasn't involved. I'm very grateful for that. But everything did kind of come easy for me. And then when I did the half Ironman, I trained what I think was very hard for 3 months. I trained more for that event than I trained for anything. And now I just think back like, man, if I trained that hard for soccer, like how good could I have been?
Mm-hmm.
But anyways,
Mm-hmm.
I trained 3 months religiously for that half Ironman. I flew out to Boulder and I failed. I wasn't able to finish the race. I finished the swim, but I finished the bike ride too slow. So when I finished the bike ride, they wouldn't let me go into the run because I was behind the cutoff time. And I wasn't really devastated. My legs hurt so bad that I was kind of like happy that they told me I couldn't go because I would have kept going. And but I wasn't devastated or anything. I just didn't really know how to process it.
Mm-hmm.
And so on the way home with my wife, Erin, we looked up the schedule and we saw that the next race was going to be in Augusta, Georgia, which is a short drive from Atlanta.
Mm-hmm.
And she was like, you know what? Like, you've already done all this training. I don't want you to train anymore because it takes you away from us, but do it for one more month and go down there and do the race.
What
And
an amazing
I knew
partner.
I knew I could do the race.
Mm-hmm.
That was probably the most devastating piece about failing is I knew I could do it,
Mm-hmm.
but my legs cramped up, and I think it was the nutrition plan that I was on that didn't help. long story short, I trained for one more month, dialed in my nutrition plan, went down to Augusta and finished the race.
Wow.
And it was an incredible feeling to look back on that and say, I worked extremely hard and I still failed, but I was able to get back up and do it.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And very rarely have I worked very hard for something and failed. And I think it was just such an eye opener. Um, and I've actually applied that lesson to life a few times since then. And yeah, it was an incredible story for me. And it's something I like to share with others.
It's I mean, anytime that we could talk endurance feats and sports and failures and comebacks, like that's a jam that a lot of people, you know, can get behind and be inspired by. I
And I
also
know you have an impressive record there as well with
Yeah,
me.
it's just, you
Yeah.
know, it's similar to your brother, just have that like endurance mindset, always wanted to do, you know, big things. I've done my fair share of ultra marathons. And I mean, I feel
Hmm.
like it's been, you know, 10, 15 years of daily training for, I like in my daily alarm is titled, always game ready, right? Just
I love
meaning
that.
like staying ready to say yes to
Yeah.
opportunities. That was how I was able to climb Mount Rainier here. I live in Washington State, like Seattle. I had a buddy, same an Ironman guy who asked me to climb Rainier. We had, you know, 1 week till we were at the top, and I said, "Let's do it." You
Yeah. I
know,
love
like,
it.
and without having to be nervous for like my physical condition, right? I when strapped up a backpack and ripped this mountain that's a local to us with a couple dumbbells in the pack and said, "Yep, let's do it." Felt good. Give me a little training. But I had been training, you know, for the last decade, the way that I see it.
Yeah.
So to say yes. So I also think it's super cool that Aaron, right, sees that, you know, quote failure, and then almost it sounded like her idea almost to like give you the encouragement to say, "Hey, like I'm behind you, go do this." Right. And go finish what she started
Yeah.
and set out to do, which was super cool to hear.
Right.
Yeah.
And those races aren't cheap. I
No.
had to buy a bike for it. And I didn't
Yeah.
get that fancy of a bike, but the cheapest one you can find is a couple $1,000.
Yeah.
And the ticket to the race was like 700 or 800 bucks.
Yep.
And
Yeah. It's no
to
joke.
then have to buy another ticket,
Hmm.
which really at the end of the day wasn't that much money, but it is
Hmm.
still
Hmm.
substantial.
Hmm.
But yeah, she was very supportive and just like go after it.
It's cool.
She actually took an because we have two young kids. So we hired a nanny. She hired a nanny to come over, and she surprised me by taking an Uber from Atlanta to Augusta, which is like 2 hours. And she was at the finish line when I was waiting.
Wow. That's cool,
Mhm.
man.
And
That's
then,
cool.
of course, she made me drive home that night with
Yep.
legs that were wasted.
Yeah. Oh yeah, you know your place.
Um, but yeah, so cool. So so after that experience, I now set one physical challenge every year.
Okay.
And I did the year after, I set a marathon as a goal. I failed it. I waited until the end of the year to do it, and I got a foot injury, so I wasn't able to achieve it.
Mm.
So then this year rolls around. I was like, I'm doing it at the beginning of the year. So I ran a marathon in April. But again, I failed, but I had to check it off.
Yep.
And my actual next challenge was going to be to summit the Grand Teton in Jackson
Okay.
Hole.
Yeah.
I'm terrified of
Yeah.
heights,
Yeah.
terrified.
Yeah.
But I got invited to go on this heli skiing trip
No
next year
kidding.
in February. And that took 100% or 150% of my do big challenges budget. And so
That's
I
no
think
joke.
next year I'm gonna do the heli skiing, and then after that I'm gonna have to do the Grand Teton.
That's freaking epic. Where are you going? Like Alaska or Canada?
It's some remote place in Canada. It's called like the Silver Tip Lodge.
Okay.
But I know I just fly to Vancouver and then take a
Yeah.
plane, another plane.
Yeah.
So,
Very
but yeah,
cool. Very cool.
I'll share one thing about that as well. Like one of the goals that I set in my vision is in my vision, I want to surround myself with people that can take me to the next level.
For
And
sure.
you always hear that advice from people that are older than us. Like, hey, you need to surround yourself with people that are better than you, that really can challenge you, that'll push you to that next level. And while yes, I always try to do that, this is the first time I'm like investing in it.
Hmm.
So all the people going on this trip, there's 16 of them. They're all entrepreneurs that are that have exited at least one business, probably
Wow.
more. And and so I'm paying a lot of money, but to me, it's an investment to make a better network and hopefully longtime friends.
Mhm.
So that's one new thing I'm doing is actually like putting money into building that network of mine, which I've never done before. It's
Mhm.
kind of cool that I can do it heli skiing.
I was just gonna say it's kind of like your own mastermind, just with the a heliskiing trip involved,
Right.
which is
But I
probably
never
the
would have done
best
it.
way to do that.
I would never would have done this had I not set that vision.
Hmm. Hmm.
So
Because I'm also a believer, as I'm sure you are, like, you put those intentions out into the world, things are gonna move and
I-
shake to make that happen, right?
absolutely.
Yeah. It's funny on a much, much, much smaller scale. Even tonight, like I'm going out to dinner with a buddy who, in my eyes, is, 4 or 5 steps ahead of me. And
Mhm.
it's like, you know, pretty 20 bucks for dinner for probably like, couple years worth of knowledge to discuss at a dinner table,
Yeah.
So it's like just based on how do you, rearrange the perspective on how you see it, right? So
Right.
yeah. Well, hey man, I know we're approaching 8-ish p.m. or so, so we can go ahead and if you're good with it, dive into the final 4 questions that we
Sure.
have on the show for every guest. And so, and awesome stuff, by the way. Could probably
I really
chat
appreciate
for
you having me
for a
on.
while. Of course, man. So first question is regarding books and knowledge and learning. And it's not what is your favorite book, but it is what is the book or maybe like learning resource, right, that you recommend the most to other people.
I'm gonna have to say it's The Leader Within Us by Warren Rustin.
That is
I,
like
I,
circled and underlined on my paper right here ever since you
yeah.
said that.
I
Yeah.
mean, I've recommended other books, but
Mm,
I recommend Traction to every entrepreneur,
okay.
which is the entrepreneur's operating system of how to run a business.
Mm-hmm.
But really, what I like to recommend and what I'm passionate about is that leader within us. And again, it's kind of like a very short book. It's just kind of like to the point. But when I read it and when I heard Warren's message, it just is what I was like seeking then, and I didn't even know it. So it really resonated with me.
I had a guest on the show one time who mentioned that the right book at the right time can change your life forever. And so it sounds like
Yeah,
that's the impact that Warren's book had on you. So for those listening, The Leader Within Us by Warren Rustin.
right.
And then that's where you got the 1-10-10-10 as well,
Yeah.
was Warren. Very cool. I will 100,000% be checking that out. The second question here, Jake, is what is a quote that you live by?
So I knew you were going to ask me this question because I
Yeah,
did listen to some other podcasts. I don't have a quote that I live by, so I don't want to be, fake and say I live by
I
this
love
quote.
it.
But I do have kind of one philosophy, and this is also Warren. And it's funny that all these are going back to Warren, and I wish you could go see him. He's a bit older, and I think he's had some health issues, so I don't think he speaks anymore. But it was so life changing for me. But Warren talks to business leaders, and one thing he says is, he kind of questions like, why do you stress as a business leader? And all of your um, obstacles, you either have complete control over them or you have no control over them. So why stress,
Hmm.
right? If you're faced with an obstacle and you have control over it, why would you stress about that? You have complete control over it. You can make the right decision for you, your family, your business,
Hmm.
right? You have control. Or the other, you may have no control. So why would you stress about it? Just sit back and watch and see what happens. Hopefully, luck will be on your side, but there's no need to stress about it because you have no control.
It's almost that's very interesting. It's like a philosophy,
Yeah,
essentially, not a quote, but a philosophy
and it's a
to
lot
to live by.
easier said than done.
Yeah,
I stress about a
yeah.
lot of things, but I think of this a lot of times when I'm faced with a difficult situation,
Mm-hmm.
and it relieves me a little bit,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
So
For sure. Yeah. I mean, just controlling the controllables and then letting things be when they are completely out of your control. I'm sure, there's a lot that ties into it, even outside of the business setting from a family perspective, you know.
absolutely.
Um, cool. Third question here is around bucket list items, right? I heard you mention in the podcast yesterday around your 100 item, 100 things to do before you die. So this, I was
Yep.
like, oh my gosh, we could chat for a while about this. So, but the actual question is, what is it? What is a bucket list item that sets your soul on fire when you think about it? But however you want to take that question, Jake.
Yeah. So just to follow up on your point, I did try to write out 100 things I wanted to do before I die. And
Okay.
it's very hard.
Yeah.
It was for me to think of 100 things you want to do before you die.
Mm-hmm.
But I have a solid like 20 or 30.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and sorry for the background noise if there's some. The number one thing on my bucket list right now that gets me fired up is going fly fishing in the Seychelles.
Mm.
So the Seychelles is an island off the coast of Africa. It's the best saltwater fly fishing, hands down, in the world. And you catch all these. The main thing is what's called a GT that you're
Okay.
trying to catch, but you just catch all these exotic fish, like the bright blue colors, bright green, purple. You'd be amazed if you saw it. But fly fishing in the Seychelles is the number one on my list right now.
How did that end up to be number one? Obviously, I think this podcast, we have identified that fly fishing is probably your number one hobby. I would imagine, or not even hobby, like passion outside of,
Yeah.
family work and everything. So you just been fly fishing all your life, or?
No, this is something I picked up maybe like 10 years ago now.
Oh, okay.
And it was just like I was bored one day and I wanted to go do something. So I went and
Hmm.
bought a rod and went out to the Chattahoochee River that runs through Atlanta,
Okay.
fished, and I've just been enthralled with it ever since. Fortunately, so after I sold Digital Crafts, I made a promise to myself to do a kind of a once in a lifetime fly fishing trip every year.
Hmm.
And so I've been to Belize and the Bahamas twice for saltwater fly fishing. But if you want to go to the best place in the world for saltwater fly fishing, it is
Seychelles.
Seychelles.
Okay.
And it's not easy to saltwater fly fish. To cast this fly, 50 yards in front of you with 40-mile-an-hour winds, this far in front of the nose of the fish is very difficult. And so I wouldn't even go to the Seychelles today because I don't have enough skills.
Dude.
If I had the opportunity, like I can afford it, but I'm not going to do it yet. I have to
Hmm.
practice for like a few more years to really dial in, and
And
then
be
I'm
able to like enjoy the, have a chance to like fully embrace and enjoy it for what it will be,
yeah.
getting up to that skill level.
So it's the number one place in the world. That's what gets me excited. But then also, you can't just go and do it. You
Yeah.
have to really hone your craft.
Yeah. Yeah. So there's like even more behind that goal than just going to
Yeah,
do it. It's like what you have to do in the preparation for your skill and development
absolutely.
in order to actually go and almost like earn that opportunity for yourself to go do that. That's cool, man.
Yep.
I can't even imagine what that feeling was like catching your first ever fish when you went and got that rod, man. It sounds
I remember it.
very hard. I'm sure it was amazing. What a
Yeah,
feeling.
it was just a little rainbow trout that they stock in the Chattahoochee River. So they dump a lot of fish in the river every year to
Okay.
make population, and they're real easy to catch.
Uh,
Uh, But it took me like 3 hours to get them,
yeah.
and I caught them. And yeah, I mean, it's funny to think back on that. I didn't even know
Mhm.
it's too much detail, but they had released the dam, so there was so much water flowing through the Chattahoochee River that nobody in their right mind would be out there fishing. The water's way too high.
Yeah.
But I stayed out there for like 3 hours casting the same spot, and finally one bit, and that was the first trout I ever caught.
Oh man, then you were literally hooked ever
Yeah.
since. So for those listening, it's never too late to start a new hobby. You were what,
No.
26 at the time, 26, 27, something
Yep.
like that, right? So, if you got that like that instinct or that itch to just go try something, like go try it. You never know what that, lifelong hobby or passion that's undiscovered at this point, might be. So, all right, Jake, rolling into the last question here. And the send off question is, it was when I was like doing some soul searching, some career searching, some things in my own life years back. I had a mentor of mine just like point blank ask me, like, what would 65-year-old Colin say to
Mhm.
you right now in this decision? So that's the question, Jake, and you can take it however you want. Is what would 65-year-old Jake tell you, your current day self, right now?
Yeah. Recently, I've very much been living this philosophy of like you only live once, YOLO.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and I'm really big on experiences.
Mm-hmm. Me too.
So I would say the 65-year-old me would say, Jake, just don't pass up on experiences. If you
Mm-hmm.
have the opportunity to take your family on a trip, do it.
Mm-hmm.
If you have the opportunity to go fishing with somebody, go do it. Don't make up excuses. Just get out there. You only live once. You don't know when your opportunity to do things like this will evaporate. Um, and kind of one other thing Warren said, I remember is he was probably 75 when I was hearing him to speak. And he's like, I could go run a 5K tomorrow with my grandson.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so
Mm-hmm.
he's like, I maintain my health so that
Mm-hmm.
I can say yes to my grandchild who wants
That's
me to go
right.
run a 5K with him.
That's right.
And I remember that, and that's kind of stuck with me. So I really much value my health today too. But
Mm-hmm.
it's really just this like YOLO, right?
Mm-hmm.
Invest in yourself so that you can do the things you like, take advantage of experiences.
Mm-hmm. Because there's so much that goes on behind the scenes too, right? Like the health to be able to say yes to do those things, or the
Hmm.
financial means, right? So the work and the work behind the work that goes into everything. And so I really appreciate that. You and I are cut from a very similar cloth in the sense of how we think about those things. So I've also like I used to always think like go do the things that um how did I think about it? From like the form of regret, like, you know, making a list of like things that I would regret, right? Not doing. But I've actually over the last several months started thinking like the inverse, which is like, go do the thing that I definitely will not regret doing,
Yeah.
if that makes
Yeah.
sense. Right. And so like, for example, this past weekend, I was down in Portland seeing some friends and I hadn't seen them in a while. Don't know when I'll see them again. Had the opportunity to go out on the boat on Sunday and just like hang and like, you know,
Hmm.
just take a couple more hours to spend with them. And I'm like, all right, like I'll go out for an hour, but then I got like some things I got to get done. And I'm like, dude, just like show up to the boat and you will not regret, absolutely will not regret just showing up. And then sure enough, I get out there, sun shining, canceled all plans, staying on the boat, stayed over another
That's awesome.
night, so I really appreciate
I've,
that perspective.
yeah, and I've actually kind of recently thought about it a little bit differently, but it's the same thing. It's just like I don't say yes to anything I don't want to do.
Mm,
It's like
right.
a lot of things that I
Yeah.
historically would have done, but now where I am in life is I have no interest, and so you have to catch yourself sometimes and just say, you know
Hmm.
what? No, I don't
Hmm.
want to do that. I'm going to
And
sit
that's
right in
okay.
bed and yeah, go to sleep early.
That's okay, right?
Yeah.
And it's kind of going back to your concept and the concept around time, right? Like you
Hmm.
have a limited time to be able to continue living into that vision that you've set for yourself. So if something is not in line with that, it really is okay
Yeah.
to say no, while also, being okay with saying, yes, Jake, you should actually go do this fly fishing trip or the hella skiing trip. That is this once in a lifetime thing. I'm also think about it from like, is this a unique experience that can never be replicated, in the same way with these people? And then weigh the balance of like, okay, thinking about it that way, then do I want to go do this? And will I not regret it for sure? So,
Yeah.
yeah.
I just keep thinking about things like I think we could talk about this forever.
We very well could. I want to be mindful of the time, and so I think we basically nailed this little time slot here and window of opportunity. So we can go ahead and wrap things there, Jake. And before we do, is there anything else that you want to share with the audience? Anything that you're super excited to share right now, or anything top of mind for you?
I don't think so.
Yeah.
Um, well, there's this one thought that I
Okay.
had recently, and I shared it with you yesterday, and I was like, do I regret saying that? Do I really believe that? But
Mm,
I think I do. And one thing that I'm trying to be more open about telling is my story with digital crafts.
hmm.
And that is, we built a business and we ended up selling it for over $20 million.
Wow.
And I think it's possible for anybody to do that
Hmm.
that wants it. Right.
Mm,
And I don't want to be cliche and say just go work hard.
that's right.
But if you take a very strategic approach to doing research, finding a business that would sell for that amount of money, learning how much you need to grow it, committing to it, being consistent year after year, and getting some help along the way, a mentor structure, it's something that I think I might start talking about more
Hmm.
publicly.
Hmm.
that, if I can do this, you can do this. And I don't want to be an entrepreneur coach at all,
Mm-hmm.
but I have this experience that changed my life and this outcome that changed my family's future that I think a lot of people might be interested in, because a lot of people are interested in entrepreneurship, a lot aren't, but those who are, I do think there's a kind of conservative approach to it where you can build a business and sell it for life-changing money. Obviously you can build a AI tool that takes off and get even a lot more money, but there's also more risk to that where it could be
Mm-hmm.
nothing.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, that's one thing that I don't know if I'll come out more publicly and in more of a structured way and start sharing content around that. But it's just a thought I've had recently that I get really fired up inside about.
Mm-hmm.
That if I can do this, so can you if you want it.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think
Yeah, that's all I got.
you have a ton of, and thank you for being vulnerable in that sense, because it sounds like you have a lot of passion inside of you for the experience that you went through, for that, in the sense of like, people can actually do this too,
Yeah,
right? And a lot of people just don't, maybe not have that belief to do it. And so, hey man, if you ever want to come and you feel more open to want to talk about it, like, happy to have you on, and we could literally dissect what goes into that. But for the meantime, we can cap things there. And Jake, maybe if you want to, just before we jump, share where people can find you online. I know you're writing on LinkedIn every day right now, and where can people find you and go to connect with you? What's the best way to get in contact?
please connect with me on LinkedIn.
Cool.
I set a goal to create content 6 out of 7 days a week, and I've been doing it for about a month, and will continue to for a few years. And so I'd love for you to follow me on LinkedIn.
Cool. And it's super valuable. I mean, you're sharing screenshots of your calendar, your time blocks, like everything that we've talked about here today. You're sharing your process, right? You're documenting your processes. And so I've loved reading and seeing. I remember you did your 1 10 10 10 on there. So cool.
Yeah,
LinkedIn.
I really
Um,
appreciate that.
yeah, man. All right. Well, Jake, we can go ahead, wrap things there. Thank you for coming on to the Seeds of Success podcast. It was a pleasure to have you on the show, and we'll
I'm
hopefully
very
see you next
grateful to
time.
be here.
Yeah, man.
Thanks so
All right.
much.
You bet.
Cheers.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Seeds of Success podcast. If you got to the end of this episode, can you please do me a huge favor and leave a 5-star rating and review? This helps me be able to reach out to bigger guests and also be able to get access to special events and activities that otherwise would not be possible without your support. So if you could please take just 3 seconds and leave a 5-star rating and review, it would mean the world to me, and I will see you on the next episode.